Welcome to one of the most chilling disappearances ever recorded in the history of the North American frontier. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this account. We want to know what places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach around the world. In the winter of 1897, at the height of the Klondike Gold Rush, 6 experienced hunters departed from Dawson City in the Yukon Territory. They were heading into the remote Richardson Mountains to hunt caribou and trap furs during the prime winter season. These were not greenhorn prospectors dreaming of gold. These were hardened frontiersmen who had survived multiple Arctic winters. They left on December 3rd with supplies for 3 months and a promise to return before spring breakup. They never came back, not one of them. And what searchers found the following summer would convince authorities that something in those mountains was so dangerous that the entire region needed to be closed to human access permanently. This is the story of the Richardson Six, an expedition that vanished into the white silence of the far north. A mystery that the Canadian government worked desperately to suppress, and a wilderness area that remains restricted more than 125 years later for reasons that have never been adequately explained to the public. The Yukon Territory in 1897 was experiencing the greatest gold rush in history. The discovery of gold in Bonanza Creek in August 1896 had triggered a mass migration that would see over 100,000 people attempt the journey to the Klondike. Most arrived in 1897 and 1898. Flooding into Dawson City, a settlement that exploded from a few hundred residents to over 40,000 in less than 2 years. It was chaos. Fortunes were made and lost overnight. Men died from cold, disease, and violence, and the wilderness surrounding the gold fields remained as deadly as it had always been, indifferent to human ambition. But not everyone who came north was looking for gold. Some saw opportunity in supplying the thousands of prospectors who needed food, clothing, and equipment. Among the most valuable commodities were fresh meat and quality furs. The winter of 1897 offered prime hunting conditions. Caribou herds were strong. Fur-bearing animals had thick coats, and prices in Dawson City were astronomical. A man who could supply fresh meat or prime pelts could make a fortune without ever touching a gold pan. It was in this context that 6 men decided to organize a major hunting expedition into the Richardson Mountains, a remote range lying between the Yukon and Northwest Territories, approximately 150 miles north of Dawson City. The Richardson Mountains were known for excellent hunting, but they were also known for being dangerous. The terrain was rugged, the weather was brutal, even by Yukon standards, and the indigenous peoples, primarily Gwich'in, spoke of the mountains with caution, mentioning places that should be avoided and valleys that held dangers beyond the purely physical. The 6 men who organized the expedition were all experienced in Arctic survival. According to records preserved in the Yukon archives in Whitehorse, their names were Thomas Henshaw, age 39, from Minnesota, the expedition leader. Henshaw had worked as a guide and hunter throughout Alaska and the Yukon for 12 years. He knew the North as well as any white man could. Ames Mackenzie, age 34, from Ontario, a trapper who had spent 8 winters in the Yukon and spoke some Gwich'in, having traded with them extensively. William Kowalski, age 42, from Wisconsin, a logger turned hunter who had worked in lumber camps across the Northern Territories before finding more profitable work supplying meat to mining camps. Robert Sullivan, age 31, from Ireland, an immigrant who had come to Canada in 1889 and had established himself as a skilled hunter and wilderness guide. Daniel Foster, age 36, from Michigan, a former fur trader who knew the mountains well and claimed to have mapped routes that other trappers had not discovered. And Carl Jensen, age 28, from Norway, the youngest of the group, but highly experienced, having grown up hunting and trapping in Scandinavia before emigrating to North America. 6 men, all in their physical prime, all with years of wilderness experience, all aware of the dangers of winter travel in the far north. They were as prepared as humans could be for an Arctic hunting expedition. What they could not be prepared for was what waited for them in the Richardson Mountains. The expedition departed Dawson City on December 3, 1897. The town was bustling despite the winter cold. Temperatures were already well below 0 Fahrenheit, and the Yukon River was frozen solid. The men traveled by dog sled, following established trails north toward the Richardson Mountains. They had 12 dogs pulling 2 large sleds loaded with supplies, camping equipment, traps, weapons, and trade goods in case they encountered indigenous peoples. According to a letter written by Thomas Henshaw to his brother in Minnesota, dated November 28, 1897, and preserved in family papers, the plan was straightforward. They would travel north for approximately 1 week, establish a base camp in the foothills of the Richardson Mountains, and then spend 6 to 8 weeks hunting and trapping. They expected to take significant quantities of caribou meat, which they would cache in the cold to retrieve later, and trap valuable furs, including Arctic fox, lynx, and wolverine. They would return to Dawson City in late February or early March, sell their harvest for substantial profit, and spend the rest of the winter comfortably supplied with funds. Henshaw's letter expressed confidence about the expedition. He wrote, "The mountains are remote but not unknown to us. Foster and I have both hunted the southern ranges, and Mackenzie has traded with the Gwitch, in who know every valley. We are well equipped and experienced. The only danger is the cold, and we respect it sufficiently to take all necessary precautions. I expect to return with enough profit to establish myself in business when the gold rush madness subsides." The expedition was witnessed leaving Dawson City by numerous residents. Several prospectors who were camped along the northern trail later reported seeing the 6 men pass by in the first days of December, heading steadily north with their dog teams. The last confirmed sighting was on December 8th, when a Gwitch hunting party encountered the expedition approximately 100 miles north of Dawson City. The Gwitch hunters, according to their later testimony given to Royal Canadian Mounted Police, warned the white men about traveling further north. They said the mountains beyond were not good in winter. They spoke of a place they called Ttiich, which translates approximately as Bad Spirit Valley, and advised the hunters to avoid it. Thomas Henshaw reportedly thanked them for the warning, but said they would be careful. The Gwitch watched the expedition continue north, and then returned to their own camp. They were the last people known to have seen the 6 hunters alive. The expedition was supposed to return by late February 1898 at the latest. When March arrived with no sign of the hunters, concern began to grow in Dawson City. These were not careless men. Henshaw in particular was known for his reliability. If he said he would return by late February, he meant it. By mid-March, friends and business associates of the missing hunters began organizing a search party. The search was complicated by several factors. First, the exact location where the hunters had planned to establish their base camp was not precisely known. Henshaw had mentioned the Richardson Mountains generally, but had not provided specific coordinates. Second, winter in the Yukon does not end in March. The snow remains deep. Temperatures are still brutally cold. Travel is difficult. Third, the sheer size of the area to be searched was daunting. The Richardson Mountains cover thousands of square miles of some of the most remote wilderness in North America. Despite these challenges, a search party was organized by late March. 8 men, all experienced in Arctic travel, volunteered to go north and look for the missing hunters. They were led by a Royal Canadian Mounted Police constable named William Morrison, who had been assigned to Dawson City to maintain order during the gold rush. Morrison's party departed on March 28, 1898, following the route the hunters were known to have taken. The search party traveled north for 2 weeks, following the frozen rivers and valleys that led into the Richardson Mountains. They found evidence of the hunters' passage, old campsites, a broken sled runner that had been discarded, marks where dog teams had rested. They were on the right track, but as they pushed deeper into the mountains, the evidence became more disturbing. On April 12th, approximately 140 miles north of Dawson City, and deep into the Richardson Range, Morrison's party made their first significant discovery. They found a campsite that had clearly been used by the missing hunters. The site was in a protected valley with good access to water and timber. It appeared to have been a base camp, the kind of location a hunting party would use for an extended stay. But the condition of the camp was troubling. The camp had been abandoned in apparent haste. Equipment was scattered. A tent was torn and partially collapsed. Most disturbing, there were signs of violence. Blood was found frozen in the snow, significant quantities, suggesting serious injury. Drag marks led away from the camp into the surrounding forest. The search party followed these marks for several hundred yards before they disappeared into an area of exposed rock where tracks could not be seen. Morrison documented everything carefully. He noted that the blood appeared to be human based on the quantity and pattern. He estimated that at least one person had been seriously injured at this camp. But there were no bodies. The dogs were also gone, all 12 of them. Their tether lines had been cut or broken, and there was no sign of the animals anywhere in the vicinity. The search party searched the surrounding area for 3 days. They found more disturbing evidence. Personal items scattered over a wide area, as if people had been running and dropping things. A rifle broken and useless. A journal belonging to Daniel Foster, frozen solid, its pages unreadable without thawing. And most chilling, they found tracks, human tracks. But something was wrong with them. They were the right size and shape, but the stride was wrong. Too long, too regular, as if whoever made them had been running in great bounding leaps rather than normal steps. These tracks led higher into the mountains, toward a narrow valley that cut between 2 steep ridges. Morrison was reluctant to follow. His men were exhausted, supplies were running low, and something about the valley ahead made everyone uneasy. Several members of the search party reported feeling watched. Others described a sensation of wrongness that intensified as they approached the valley entrance. Morrison, a rational man trained in police work, dismissed these feelings as the psychological effects of the grim discoveries they had made. But privately, according to his report filed with the RCMP after his return, he admitted that he felt it too, a sense that they were approaching something that did not want to be approached. The decision was made to mark the location and retreat to Dawson City for reinforcements and additional supplies. Morrison left markers indicating their route and the location of the abandoned camp. Then the search party began the long journey back south. They traveled quickly, pushing their dogs hard, and reached Dawson City on April 28, 1898. Morrison's report to his superiors was detailed and disturbing. He confirmed that the 6 hunters had reached the Richardson Mountains and established a base camp. He documented evidence of violence and injury at the camp. He reported finding human tracks that suggested the hunters, or some of them, had fled toward a specific valley deeper in the mountains. And he requested a larger, better-equipped expedition to continue the search and determine what had happened. The RCMP authorized a second search expedition to depart in mid-May, once weather conditions improved slightly. This expedition would consist of 12 men, including Morrison, several additional Mounties, experienced trackers, and a physician. They would be equipped with extensive supplies, and would have authorization to remain in the field for up to 6 weeks. This second expedition departed Dawson City on May 18, 1898. They made good time traveling north, following Morrison's marked route. They reached the abandoned base camp on May 31st. The camp was exactly as Morrison had described it. Nothing had changed in the 6 weeks since his first visit. The frozen blood, the scattered equipment, the signs of violence, all present and undisturbed. The expedition established their own secure camp nearby, and then began a systematic search of the surrounding area. They were looking for bodies, for additional evidence, for any indication of what had happened to the 6 hunters. On June 3rd, they found the first body, or what remained of it. The body was located approximately 2 miles from the base camp, partially buried in snow at the edge of a frozen stream. It was identified through clothing and personal effects as William Kowalski, one of the 6 hunters. The condition of the body was shocking. Kowalski had been partially eaten. Large portions of flesh were missing from the torso and limbs. The pattern of damage did not match any known predator. Bears were still in hibernation in early December when the hunters would have died. Wolves would have left different marks. The physician examining the remains noted that some of the wounds appeared to have been made by human teeth, but the bite radius was too large, suggesting something with a mouth bigger than a normal human. The expedition continued searching. Over the following week, they found 3 more bodies. Robert Sullivan was found in a similar condition to Kowalski, partially consumed, hidden under a rock overhang about a mile from the base camp. Carl Jensen was discovered near the entrance to the valley that Morrison had marked, his body frozen in a position that suggested he had been running when he died. And James Mackenzie was found high on a ridge overlooking the valley, as if he had climbed there trying to escape something below. All 4 bodies showed evidence of violence. All had been partially eaten, and all were found in positions or locations suggesting they had been fleeing from something. The 2 remaining hunters, Thomas Henshaw and Daniel Foster, were not found, despite extensive searching. The expedition scoured the area for miles in all directions, but no trace of the 2 men was discovered. What the expedition did find was the valley, the narrow valley between steep ridges that Morrison had identified as the direction the tracks led. The valley was approximately 3 miles long and perhaps a quarter-mile wide at its widest point, a deep cut between towering rock walls. The floor was relatively flat, covered in snow and scattered boulders, and at the far end of the valley, barely visible from the entrance, was something that stopped the entire expedition cold. It was a structure, not natural, not made by any recent human hands. A formation of standing stones arranged in a rough circle, each stone perhaps 15 feet tall and 4 feet wide. The stones were dark, almost black, and appeared to be covered in ice or some kind of frost that never melted even in the brief summer sun. Around these stones, arranged in complex patterns, were smaller rocks and what appeared to be carved symbols or marks in the frozen ground. The expedition approached cautiously. As they drew closer to the stone circle, several men reported feeling dizzy and disoriented. The physician noted that the air seemed somehow thicker near the stones, though he could detect no gas or obvious atmospheric difference. Most disturbing was the sound. Everyone heard it once they were within about 500 yards of the circle. A low-frequency vibration, barely audible but felt in the chest and bones. It was constant, unchanging, and had no apparent source. The sound did not come from the stones themselves, or from any mechanism. It simply was there, part of the environment near the stone circle. Morrison, determined to document everything properly, insisted on examining the stone circle closely. He and 3 other men approached to within perhaps 50 feet. At this distance, the disorientation became intense. One man vomited. Another claimed he could see figures moving between the stones, though when looked at directly, nothing was there. Morrison himself reported that his watch stopped working. When he looked at it, the hands were spinning backwards. He pulled back immediately, and once he retreated about 100 yards from the circle, His watch resumed normal function. The group made a collective decision not to enter the stone circle or approach closer than about 100 feet. Something about the place was fundamentally wrong in ways that went beyond normal human experience. The physician suggested they were experiencing some kind of magnetic or atmospheric phenomenon that affected human perception and bodily function. But no one was comfortable remaining near the site for long. As the expedition was preparing to retreat from the valley and return to their base camp, one of the trackers made a discovery that answered some questions while raising others. Carved into a flat rock face near the valley entrance was a message. The carving was crude, done with a knife or similar tool, and the letters were barely legible. But the message was clear enough. They come from the stones at night, going higher. God help us. Henshaw. This message confirmed that Thomas Henshaw had survived at least long enough to reach the valley and encounter whatever was there. It also suggested that the hunters had fled toward higher ground, trying to escape something that came from or near the stone circle. The expedition searched the higher elevations surrounding the valley, but found no additional bodies or evidence. After 2 weeks in the area, the expedition retreated to Dawson City. Morrison filed his report on June 28, 1898. The report was the most comprehensive documentation of the disaster to date. It confirmed that 4 of 6 hunters were dead, killed by unknown causes. It documented the stone circle and the strange phenomena associated with it. It presented Henshaw's carved warning as evidence that something had attacked or threatened the hunters, and it recommended that the entire area be declared off-limits to further exploration until the nature of the threat could be determined. The report created a sensation when it reached Ottawa. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police Headquarters was not sure how to handle it. The deaths were clear, but the explanations involving strange stone circles and atmospheric anomalies sounded like frontier superstition rather than factual police work. The RCMP assigned a senior inspector, a man named Edward Thompson, to review the case and determine what action should be taken. Thompson traveled to Dawson City in August 1898 and spent several weeks interviewing everyone connected with the case. He reviewed all the evidence. He examined the personal effects recovered from the bodies, and he made the decision to mount one final expedition to the site, this time with the specific goal of documenting the stone circle and determining whether it posed a genuine threat or was simply a natural formation that had been misinterpreted by exhausted searchers. Thompson's expedition departed in early September 1898. It consisted of 20 men, including scientists, surveyors, and RCMP constables. They carried advanced equipment for the time, including theodolites for surveying, meteorological instruments, and cameras. The plan was to systematically document everything about the site, take measurements, and collect samples that could be analyzed. The expedition reached the valley on September 18th. They found it exactly as Morrison had described. The stone circle stood at the far end, dark and frost-covered. The low-frequency sound was present and felt by everyone. The disorientation effects began at approximately the same distance Morrison had noted. Thompson organized his men carefully. He established a secure camp well back from the stone circle and then began a methodical approach. Surveyors mapped the stones' positions. The photographer attempted to capture images, though he reported the stones were difficult to photograph, appearing somehow blurred or indistinct in every image, despite clear atmospheric conditions. The scientists took readings of temperature, air pressure, and magnetic fields. The magnetic readings were particularly anomalous. Compasses became unreliable within about 200 yards of the circle. At 100 yards, they spun uselessly. The scientists theorized there might be a large iron deposit in the ground causing magnetic interference, but subsequent testing found no such deposit. The magnetic anomaly had no apparent physical source. On September 21st, Thompson made the decision to enter the stone circle itself. He would go alone, connected to his men by a rope, so he could be pulled back if he experienced problems. He approached slowly, documenting his observations. At 50 feet, the disorientation became severe. He described feeling like he was moving through water. At 25 feet, his vision began to blur. But he continued. At 10 feet from the nearest stone, he stopped. In his report, he wrote, "I could see now that the stones were not covered in ice or frost as we had thought. They were covered in something else, a crystalline growth that seemed to pulse very faintly with an internal light." I reached out to touch the nearest stone, and as my hand approached, I heard voices, not through my ears, but somehow inside my mind. Voices speaking in no language I recognized. I pulled my hand back and immediately signaled to be withdrawn. Thompson retreated from the circle and refused to make another approach. He declared the site to be dangerous, though he could not specify the exact nature of the danger. The expedition remained in the area for another 5 days, conducting observations from a distance. On September 26, they witnessed something that convinced everyone to leave immediately. It was approximately 3 a.m. Most of the camp was asleep, but 2 men were on watch duty. They reported that the stone circle began to emit light. Not a glow or reflection, but light that seemed to come from within the stones themselves. The light was a pale blue-green color and pulsed rhythmically. As the light intensified, the men reported seeing shapes moving within the circle. Dark shapes, roughly human in size and form, but moving in ways that did not seem natural. The shapes appeared to be emerging from the ground near the stones, or perhaps from the stones themselves. The guards woke the camp. Thompson and several others observed the phenomenon for approximately 20 minutes. Then, as dawn approached, the light faded and the shapes, whatever they were no longer visible. Thompson made the immediate decision to abandon the expedition. They packed rapidly and were traveling south by noon that same day. Thompson's final report, filed in October 1898, was classified as confidential by the RCMP. It was not released to the public. The report concluded that the site in the Richardson Mountains represented a genuine danger to human life, though the exact nature of the danger could not be scientifically explained. Thompson recommended that the area be permanently closed to public access, and that no further expeditions be authorized unless new technologies or knowledge made safe investigation possible. The Canadian government accepted this recommendation. In November 1898, the Richardson Mountains area, specifically the region surrounding the stone circle, was declared a restricted zone. Access required government authorization, which was almost never granted. The official reason given was protection of sensitive indigenous cultural sites. The real reason was never publicly stated. The families of the 6 missing hunters were informed that 4 bodies had been recovered, and that the other 2 were presumed dead. The bodies were returned to Dawson City and buried. Funeral services were held, and the official explanation for the deaths was recorded as killed by wildlife and exposure in remote wilderness. There was no mention of stone circles, strange lights, or unexplained phenomena. But the story leaked out anyway. Frontiersmen in Dawson City talked. Search party members shared what they had seen, despite being told to keep quiet. By 1899, the story of the Richardson Six and the Cursed Valley had become part of Yukon folklore. Prospectors and trappers avoided the area. The Gwich'in, who had always avoided it, felt vindicated in their traditional knowledge. White men had learned the hard way that some places were not meant for human presence. Over the following decades, the Richardson Mountains restricted zone was occasionally visited by government researchers. Reports from these visits remain classified to this day, but fragments have been leaked or declassified over the years. A 1923 geological survey noted continuing magnetic anomalies near the stone circle. A 1947 military reconnaissance expedition documented the structures and recommended against any military use of the area. A 1968 scientific team attempted to study the site using modern equipment and retreated after 3 days, citing equipment malfunctions and adverse psychological effects on team members. In 1979, satellite imagery of the Richardson Mountains became available. Analysts who examined the images noted an unusual heat signature in the valley where the stone circle is located. The area appears several degrees warmer than the surrounding terrain even in winter, despite no apparent geothermal activity. This anomaly has never been explained. The most recent documented incident occurred in 2003, when 2 experienced wilderness guides attempted to reach the stone circle. They were conducting an unauthorized expedition, hoping to document the site and determine if the stories were true or exaggerated. They were equipped with GPS, satellite phones, and modern camping equipment. They reached the valley in August 2003 and attempted to approach the stone circle. According to the statement one of them gave later, they experienced everything that had been described in historical accounts: the disorientation, the low-frequency sound, the magnetic interference that made their GPS units useless. They witnessed the stones appearing to pulse with faint light even in daylight, and on their second night in the valley, they both reported seeing shapes moving near the circle, shapes that appeared to be made of shadow but had a definite form and purpose in their movement. The 2 guides left the area immediately and reported their experience to Canadian authorities. They were fined for entering a restricted area and warned that they could face more serious charges if they disclosed the location to others or attempted to return. Neither guide has spoken publicly about what they saw, though the basic facts of their unauthorized expedition became known through legal proceedings. Today, more than 125 years after the Richardson 6 disappeared, the area remains restricted. The official reason has changed over the decades. Current explanations involve protecting endangered species and preserving indigenous heritage sites. But the actual restrictions remain as severe as they were in 1898. The stone circle is still there, deep in the Richardson Mountains, in a valley that appears on no public maps. And whatever killed at least 4 of 6 hunters in December 1897 remains there as well, waiting in the frozen darkness. What really happened to the Richardson 6? The evidence suggests they established a base camp and then explored deeper into the mountains. They found or were drawn to the valley with the stone circle. Something there, something connected with the stones, attacked them. 4 were killed and partially consumed. 2 fled higher into the mountains and were never found. Whether they died from exposure, from whatever attacked the others, or met some other fate remains unknown. The stone circle itself is the key to the mystery. Every expedition that has approached it has experienced similar phenomena: magnetic anomalies, disorientation, strange sounds and lights, and the sense that something is present there. Something that is aware of human presence and hostile to it. The Yukon knew this for generations. They called it a bad spirit valley and warned people to stay away. The white hunters ignored the warnings and paid with their lives. Could the stone circle be a natural formation with unusual magnetic or acoustic properties that creates perceptual effects? Possibly. But this does not explain the violence visited upon the hunters. It does not explain the human-like tracks with impossible stride lengths. It does not explain the sense that multiple witnesses have reported of something actively malevolent residing there. Could there be an undiscovered animal species in those mountains? Something large enough and aggressive enough to kill 6 armed hunters? The far north has surprises still, but no known predator matches the evidence, and no animal explains the phenomena associated with the stone circle itself. Or could there be something else? Something that exists in ways we do not fully understand. Indigenous peoples across North America have stories about thin places, locations where the boundary between our world and other realms is permeable. They have stories about beings that exist in those in-between spaces, beings that are dangerous to encounter. Could the valley with the stone circle be one such place? The Canadian government has clearly decided that whatever is there is dangerous enough to justify permanent closure of the area. They have maintained this closure for more than a century despite the cost and administrative burden. They have classified reports and prevented public discussion. This suggests that official investigations have concluded the threat is real, even if its nature cannot be publicly acknowledged. 6 hunters went to the frozen north in 1897. None ever returned. 4 died violently. 2 vanished completely. And the place where they met their fate remains one of the most restricted areas in North America. The chilling truth is exposed not in what we know, but in what we are not allowed to know. In the reports that remain classified, in the restricted zone that cannot be entered, in the persistent policy of suppression and denial that has characterized every aspect of this case for 125 years. The families of the Richardson Six never received full answers. They were told their loved ones died in a wilderness accident. They buried bodies when they could, and held memorials when they could not. They accepted the official explanations because they had no other choice. But they knew something was being hidden. They knew that men like Thomas Henshaw, experienced and careful, did not simply die from exposure or animal attacks. They knew that the truth was more terrible than they were being told. The Richardson Mountains rise still in the far north, remote and beautiful and deadly. Somewhere in those mountains, in a valley unmarked on any map, a circle of dark stones stands waiting. The Gwich'in still avoid it. Government restrictions keep others away. But the stones remain, and whatever they guard or contain or represent remains active. Researchers who have approached in recent years report the same phenomena that Thompson documented in 1898. Nothing has changed. Whatever is there has not died or departed. It waits still, patient and timeless, in the frozen darkness where winter never truly ends. This is the legacy of the Richardson. A warning about the danger of ignoring indigenous knowledge. A testament to the reality that there are places on this earth that are hostile to human presence in ways that transcend normal dangers. And a reminder that the wild places of the world hold mysteries that we are not equipped to understand or survive encountering. 6 hunters went to the frozen north, seeking profit and adventure. They found something that destroyed them. The chilling truth is exposed in the permanent closure of that valley, in the classified reports that detail what was found there, and in the continuing policy that keeps the public away from a place the government clearly believes is genuinely dangerous. Some frontiers should not be crossed. Some valleys should not be entered. And some stones should not be approached, no matter how curious we might be about their origins and purpose. The Richardson Six learned this too late. Their deaths, and the government response to those deaths, carry a message that should not be ignored. There are places in this world where humans are not welcome, places where the normal rules do not apply, and places where something old and powerful and hostile waits for the foolish to approach. The frozen north holds its secrets still, and in one remote valley in the Richardson Mountains, those secrets have claimed at least 6 lives and will likely claim more if the restrictions are ever lifted, and people are allowed to discover for themselves what the hunters found in that place in the winter of 1897. The truth is chilling not because of the cold, but because of what waits there in the darkness between the ancient stones, patient and hungry, and forever watching for the next humans to wander into its domain.